This time you're going to lose.
Hello guys, I'm CBMF Productions. With the Halloween season upon us, it's the time of the year to watch a ton of horror movies and not look like a psychopath. Horror is a genre that usually gets scoffed at more than most other genres in film. Despite some prestige has been brought to the genre in recent years due to A24 and Blumhouse somewhat, we're getting a wave of brand new and refreshing films brought to the forefront to separate the genre from its ambiance of sequels and the strict Netflix VOD releases. But not all horror sequels are bad and unnecessary cash grabs. In fact, there are quite a few that fly under the radar and not many people talk about, such as today's film, William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist 3, or Legion if you want to call it that. This is the third film in the Exorcist franchise. Now it goes without question that The Exorcist is one of the most celebrated horror films of all time. Even nearly 50 years later, the film is still regarded as one of the scariest movies ever made. And it does deserve that praise in my opinion. Because of the massive critical and financial success of the film, like every great horror film, the studio realizes that they can cash in on a franchise, and so we get The Exorcist 2: The Heretic 4 years later. Exorcist 2 is received in the exact opposite way of the first film. Despite having a decent enough box office run when it was in theaters before it got booed out, the reception from it was horrendous, with people walking out and even booing the film out of theaters. From a script that made absolutely no sense, terrible subplots and visuals, a director that didn't even like the original, and so much more that's regarded as one of the worst horror sequels and just worst sequels in general ever made. And some people even say it's so bad it's good. And I completely understand that. So with how much Exorcist 2 fell flat on its face, the Exorcist series flatlined for the next 13 years. But a few years after the release of Exorcist 2, William Peter Blatty, the author of the original Exorcist book the film is based off of, wrote a sequel titled Legion, and it became a bestseller in 1983. Then for the next few years, Blatty wanted to make it into a feature film. So after having meetings with such directors as William Friedkin, the director of the original Exorcist, and even John Carpenter to direct the film, Blatty took on the director's job. He wasn't a stranger to directing since in 1986 he directed one of his adaptations of his books, The Night Configuration, and after Blatty signed with Morgan Creek, after Caracal, the other production company that was offered, after they pitched their idea for Exorcist 3, which would just be about Regan from the first film having possessed twins. That's not really relevant to the story of this film, but I want to recognize how really stupid that fucking sounds. So once the film got into production, it had a fairly smooth shooting process, but as the film got into post-production, the producers demanded Blatty to reshoot the ending to have an exorcism in there because the film's titled The Exorcist 3, which we'll get to the name later, along with putting Jason Miller in, who played Father Karras in the original Exorcist, to return as Patient X as he's called in the credits. It was basically a vessel for the Gemini Killer, the villain in this film, played by Brad Dourif, who in the theatrical cut basically added split personalities. Miller was supposed to be slated to do principal photography, but due to the fact that he had wet brain, and because of his alcoholism, he couldn't really remember or speak his lines that well. So the film was originally shot with just Brad Dourif as a Gemini Killer. Along with that, the studio also wanted more gore scenes in the film since the film was actually quite low on violence, which we'll get to in a little bit, along with changing the title from The Exorcist 1990, or Legion as it was originally titled, to just The Exorcist 3, which Blatty claimed was a stupid idea since people would just be reminded of Exorcist 2, which had nothing to do with this film. So after the film finished reshoots, it got rushed into theaters in August 1990 to beat the Exorcist parody Repossessed that would be released a few weeks later. To not undermine this film, it came out and wasn't really a major hit. It really wasn't received well at first by critics and audiences alike, and the film really didn't do that well box office wise because of the title and people not really liking the second film at all. And the film really just didn't have a major effect on the film industry or moviegoers. It was even nominated for a Razzie for George C. Scott as Worst Actor, but he thankfully lost because that was well undeserved.
I thought you told me there was nothing really wrong with you.
There isn't. My brother Eddie had these same stupid symptoms for years.
Your brother Eddie died at the age of 30.
So what? He got killed in Vietnam.
There could have been some connection.
A connection?
Are you sure this isn't serious, Joe?
Well, with Eddie there was
You shut up about Eddie!
With my brother it was nerves.
You make a lot of people nervous.
Only sinners.
Everybody!
Is everything all right in here, guys?
We're fine!
That would be in the file.
It is not in the file! It is not!
The only impact it had on the time was of course from the famous serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, which just became his favorite film, and he would often fantasize that he was a Gemini killer and would show parts of the film to his victims before he killed them. But apart from that, the film really just remained in obscurity for decades. But luckily, it has slowly grown a cult following over the years. We even got a Shout Factor release in 2016, where the lost footage of the original director's cut, which was supposedly lost from the studio's words, it was actually found and the original cut was assembled as Legion, despite the fact that the old footage couldn't really be remastered that much, so the best you get is a shooting shitty VHS quality. And that's what leads us up to today. Now, with all the history out of the way, let's actually get into the film. The film takes place 17 years after the events of the first film, where Lieutenant Kinderman, who is a side character in the original film, now being played by the late George C. Scott, as an angry and bitter cop who is almost at his wit's end. But when a string of murders start happening around Georgetown, where the film is set like the original, Kinderman goes on the breadcrumb trail to find him. He is named the Gemini Killer, who was executed 15 years prior, and Kinderman knows it can't be the copycat killer because the police lied to the press about the killer's mutilations and calling cards so people just can't walk in and say that they're the Gemini Killer. Kinderman goes to a psychiatric ward because the patient claims that he's a Gemini Killer, and he goes there and sees his father Cares, his friend who was killed in the original film falling down the iconic staircase, and then he ensues multiple long conversations with Cares, who is possessed by the Gemini Killer, played by dourif, as they are constantly switching throughout the film. And now it's up to Kinderman to stop these murders and find a way to save Cares and hopefully destroy the Gemini Killer for good. The film's story is a lot more subdued than you would expect from my plot synopsis, and it works in the film's favor. There's a lot of long conversation scenes that really just develops these characters extremely well. The atmosphere is also built up perfectly throughout this entire town and all the characters surrounding it. From scene 1, you can tell that something isn't really easy, and there's no scene in the film where you feel at ease of what's going on. You always know that there's something underneath the surface, and it knows exactly what and what not to show. The film widely doesn't really show a lot of kills in the film nor the aftermath. It feels a lot like Seven in that regard, and honestly makes it more disturbing because of the endless possibilities you can make up in your mind. Being this crime thriller with the blanket of horror encompassing all over the film, the film is a completely 180 from the original in terms of story, but still retains the tone that worked from the original film. The film kind of smartly tricks you into thinking it's just going to be a retread of the original, with the very opening shot of the film being the iconic staircase encompassed in fog, as you hear the iconic tubular bells, but only for a few seconds before it's drowned out by this just droning new score, and then you realize this is going to be something completely different and a completely new story, but it still feels organic in this universe. The Exorcist 3 does a great job in being more than just your typical scary movie. Blatty is able to build atmosphere through tone and character. The film develops our main characters in a way to where every conversation scene keeps you on the edge just as much as the scary scenes. Like I was talking about earlier, the descriptions of the horrors are honestly scarier than if we saw the gory kills in the film. The best thing involving this is when Father Dyer, another character from the original who befriends Kinderman, are having breakfast in a restaurant, and Kinderman is describing the murder of a boy that we see briefly in the opening sequence.
Killer drove an ingot into each of his eyes, then cut off his head. In place of his head was the head from the statue of Christ, all done up in blackface, like a minstrel show, you know. The eyes and the mouth painted white.
Also, now let's talk about the characters. Despite the majority of the returning characters are played by different actors, they do a good job making them feel consistent from the first film and also standing out as their own interpretations of these characters. The new characters that we also get are also acted well. And the standout for me is, of course, dourif as a Gemini Killer.
Force. Oh, few boos from the gallery, I see.
He's an actor that's been present all over the horror genre, most famously for voicing Chucky.
Don't fuck with the Chuck!
But he's so bone-chilling in this film, and he honestly gives one of my favorite performances in any film. And I've seen thousands of films, and he's that good.
The Gemini is dead.
No, I am not! I'm alive! I go on! I breathe! Look at me! Look at me! And tell me what you see.
I like plays. A decapitated head can continue to see for approximately 20 seconds. So when I have one that's cocking, I always hold it up so that it can see its body. Off comes the head without spilling one single drop of blood. Now I call that showmanship, Lieutenant.
How he's able to bounce off Kinderman is great, and how he's able to hang on to every single word in his speeches, from turning on a dime to creepy and almost monotone to screaming at the top of his lungs. He has so many ranges over the course of the film, and it's also a nice touch that in the theatrical cut he constantly switches between Jason Miller and himself. And Miller, who's the only actor returning from the original Exorcist, what he gives is also great, being able to be a manifestation to throw Kinderman off as his friend who we thought was dead 17 years ago, being able to draw Kinderman in by being the Gemini Killer is brilliant. Another thing I have to praise is the direction from Will Blatty. As someone who only directed one film previously and is mostly an author, this guy has some of the most dynamic direction I've seen from any horror film. But he's able to have so many creative shots from Dutch angles, POV shots, zoom ins, zoom outs. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's one of the first things I think about when I think about this movie, because of the way it was shot. The best sequence being a 5-minute one-shot sequence of this nurse working in the hospital, leading to the most effective jump scare according to many of all time. It's really a shame that this would be Blatty's last film that he would direct due to issues he had behind the scenes with the producers, which I hinted at earlier. The director's cut of the film, simply titled Legion, is a mostly similar film that replaces all the Padaroon dialogue sequences with the original shot sequences in this brick wall set with no Jason Miller, and the ending being completely changed from being his grand third act to Kinderman just shooting the Gemini Killer a couple of times and then the movie ends. Despite I do have my issues with the theatrical cut, mainly with the random priest that we get for one scene before he randomly shows up to fight the Gemini Killer at the end, I think this is a situation where the studio interference actually supported the film and made the film better. Because although it could work better in a book, having the killer just be killed by a couple of bullets just doesn't really seem climactic and a proper end to this story. And despite the crazy ending that the film gives us doesn't really match the rest of the film tonally, it definitely feels a lot more fitting for the end of the movie and feels like a proper climax, after 2 acts of build-up. So if you do want to watch the film, I recommend you watch the theatrical cut. But anyways, The Exorcist 3 is a fantastic film from all sides. The film is able to be a proper continuation of the first film, but not being some generic sequel that has nothing to do with the first film or directly plagiarizing it. It's able to balance by telling a story that can honestly be its own standalone film, but does build off the first film so well. And the balance for me makes it the only good Exorcist follow that we've gotten so far. The film is scary both from what you can and can't see. The dialogue is extremely memorable, from Kinderman talking about the corpse swinging up and down his bathtub to the Gemini Killer talking about a severed head. The film is a lot slower than your average horror film, but it doesn't feel boring because of how well crafted the story is, along with the atmosphere, to where you want to see what happens next. The acting is stellar across the board, the film's creepy imagery will stick with you, it has a tone and quality that makes it stand out amongst all the other horror films I've seen, it's incredibly well directed, well written, well scored, and it's extremely underrated, and if you haven't checked it out because you're kind of scared because it's a sequel to a fantastic horror film, trust me, it's a lot more than what the child suggests it is. I give The Exorcist 3 an A, a 9.5 out of 10, and a must-watch recommendation. So that's The Exorcist 3. What do you guys think about it? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, and please don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. I'm CBMF Productions, and have a happy Halloween.